My name is Arthur, and to the world, I am the very picture of success. At 35, I'm a senior partner at Sterling & Finch, one of the most prestigious law firms on the East Coast. My office on the 42nd floor of a downtown Boston skyscraper overlooks the harbor, a view from its panoramic windows that costs more than what most Americans make in a year. My suit is bespoke, my watch is Swiss, and my car in the underground garage is the latest in German engineering. I live in a world of contracts, precedents, and litigation. In this world, everything is logical. Everything follows the rules. It is a world of facts, and in it, I am king. But there is another world, a world I have diligently ignored since I learned to speak. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in yet another meeting, listening to the monotonous drone of my colleagues discussing mergers and acquisitions, I see it, out of the corner of my eye. Something dark and formless slithers behind the speaker, distorting the air like heat shimmer off summer asphalt. Sometimes, shaving in front of the bathroom mirror, I'll see for a split second that my reflection is smiling at me. Not my smile, but a predatory, toothy grin. I blink, and it's gone. Just fatigue, stress, a trick of the imagination. That's what I tell myself. Always. It started in childhood. I remember sitting in my sandbox, telling my mother that the old oak tree in our backyard was whispering to me. Not the rustle of leaves, but a true whisper. A creaky, ancient voice. I saw faces in the patterns of its bark, saw the shadows beneath its branches thicken into bizarre shapes, even when the sun was high overhead. Other children saw animals in the clouds. I saw creatures with membranous wings soaring at twilight that no one else noticed. My mother, a woman with sad eyes and a soul that seemed to belong to another era, never told me I was crazy. She would pull me close and say quietly, "We are Penhaligons, Arthur. Our line is older than the stones in these hills. We see what is hidden from others. It is not a gift, and it is not a curse. It is simply what we are." She told me stories of ancestors who could speak with the wind, of a great-grandmother who cured illnesses with herbs that grew in no botany guide, and of my grandfather, whom I'd never known. He, she said, was a wanderer, a man who walked paths not found on any map. He vanished when I was 2. Simply walked out one morning and never came back. No traces, no leads. As if he had dissolved into thin air. I didn't want to be special. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to play baseball, go on dates, and not flinch every time the shadow from a streetlight took the wrong shape. So I built my fortress of logic and law. I got into Harvard, threw myself into my studies, then my work. Even then, buried in my books, I found a strange satisfaction in unraveling the most complex cases, where the facts contradicted each other. That detective's instinct was the only thing that saved me from the tedium of case law. I filled my life with facts, figures, and statutes, pushing the whispers and shadows to the furthest periphery of my mind. I became a master of self-deception. If I couldn't prove, measure, or document something, it didn't exist. My world was made of concrete, steel, and watermarked paper. Today, I won one of the most challenging cases of my career. A corporate giant against a small but scrappy tech company. 6 months of preparation, sleepless nights, mountains of documents. And today, the jury returned a verdict in our favor. There was champagne at the office. Congratulations. Pats on the back. I smiled, shook hands, said all the right things, but I felt hollow. The victory brought no joy, only a profound exhaustion. As I drove home on the nearly empty highway, the city lights fell away behind me, giving way to dark suburbs with their neat lawns and sleeping houses. I thought about the case, the next steps, my bonus. about everything except what had started again in the courtroom. During the opposing counsel's closing argument, I had seen it again. Behind his shoulder, in the bright glare of the fluorescent lights, the darkness had coalesced for a moment. It took the shape of a tall, stooped figure with unnaturally long limbs. It leaned toward the lawyer's ear, and he faltered, losing his train of thought. No one but me noticed. I gripped the arms of my chair until my knuckles turned white and forced myself to stare at my immaculately polished shoes, repeating to myself like a mantra, "It's not real. It's not real. You're tired, Arthur. Just extreme exhaustion." I had convinced myself. Almost. But as I thought about it now, behind the wheel, an icy knot in my stomach told me I was lying. My mother was right. I see what is hidden. And no matter how many walls of logic I build, these shadows always find a crack to seep through. They wait. They are always waiting at the edge of my vision, on the fringe of my mind, reminding me that the world I have so carefully constructed for myself is just a thin, fragile shell. And today, I felt it was about to crack. It was past midnight when I turned onto my quiet, maple-lined street. My house, a 2-story colonial, stood deep on its lot, surrounded by an old garden and a perfect lawn maintained by a gardener. Normally, the sight of it brought me a sense of peace, of reliability and order. Not tonight. After killing the engine, I sat in the car for a few more minutes, listening to the silence. It was the wrong kind of silence. Too thick. Too heavy. Usually, I could hear the chirp of crickets at night, the distant hum of the highway, even a neighbor's dog barking. Now, nothing. An absolute oppressive silence, as if the whole world were holding its breath. I got out of the car. The cool night air touched my skin, making me shiver. The automatic lights flooded the driveway with a soft glow, but the shadows under the old apple trees in the garden seemed deeper and darker than usual. I had a sharp, irrational feeling that I was not alone. The sensation of being watched, a heavy, scrutinizing gaze. I turned slowly, peering into the darkness of the garden. Nothing. Just a tangle of branches against an inky sky. "Enough, Arthur," I ordered myself mentally. "You won the case of the century. You're wiped. Your brain is just serving up some glitches." I thought again of my abilities, of my mother's words. Annoyance with myself mingled with fear. I didn't want to be that strange boy who saw monsters in the shadows. I was Arthur Penhaligon, attorney at law, rational, successful. I forced myself to turn away from the garden and walk toward the house. The lock clicked, and I stepped into the cool entryway. As I was closing the door, I cast one last glance over my shoulder. And in that moment, I saw it. Not just a shadow. A distinct, tall, unnaturally thin silhouette darted from one apple tree to another. It didn't move like a person. Too fast, too fluid, as if woven from the gloom itself. My heart skipped a beat. I slammed the door shut and turned the deadbolt twice. It was a deer, I whispered into the empty house. Or just a trick of the light. You're tired. I repeated this as I took off my jacket and loosened my tie. I made myself walk through the living room to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were trembling slightly. I decided a hot shower and a late dinner were all I needed to pull myself together. Under the streams of hot water, I almost relaxed. Steam filled the bathroom, making the world beyond the frosted glass of the shower door blurry and unreal. I closed my eyes, letting the water wash away the day's tension. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, the same ringing silence still filled the house. Heading down to the kitchen, I took the leftover steak from the fridge and put it in the microwave. That's when I heard it. A creak. It came from the second floor, not the normal settling of an old house. This was a distinct, measured creak of a floorboard under someone's weight, directly above my head. In my bedroom, my blood ran cold. The first thought that shot through my brain was absurdly mundane. Burglars. Someone had broken in while I was in the shower. I slowly, silently backed away toward the kitchen table where my phone lay. I grabbed it, but the screen stayed black. It had been fully charged when I left the office. I pressed the power button again and again. No reaction. Dead. Panic, cold and sticky, began to rise in my throat. No communication. I was alone in the house with someone or something. I peeked cautiously from the kitchen into the hallway. The path to the front door was clear. If I could just run outside, I could scream for help, run to the neighbors. On tiptoe, trying not to breathe, I crossed the living room. Moonlight filtering through the blinds cast stripes of light and shadow on the floor, turning the familiar room into a labyrinth. I reached the front door. My trembling fingers found the deadbolt. I turned it, then the second lock. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, putting my full weight into it. It didn't even move. It felt as if it were being held from the other side, as if something huge and heavy were simply braced against it, refusing to let me out. In desperation, I pounded on the thick oak, but the sound was dull and hopeless. I was trapped. In my own home. Another creak, closer this time. On the stairs leading down from the second floor, a step, a pause, another step. Someone was coming down, slowly, deliberately. I sprang back from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. I backed away, deeper into the living room, my eyes fixed on the dark opening of the stairwell. I couldn't see anything but a thick, impenetrable gloom, but I could feel it. The presence. It was cold, ancient, and full of malice. The air grew heavier, seeming to press down on me, squeezing the oxygen from my lungs. Creak. The last step. Silence. It was downstairs, just yards away from me, hidden in the darkness of the hall. I could hear its breathing, a low, gurgling rasp, like the growl of a sick animal. I couldn't move, paralyzed by terror. All my rational explanations, my entire fortress of logic, had crumbled to dust. This was real. The primal fear I had suppressed my entire life erupted, flooding my consciousness. And then in the darkness, two lights ignited. Two glowing embers, red-hot and filled with inhuman hatred. They were staring right at me. They were about 7 feet off the floor. The creature was enormous. Slowly, its form began to emerge from the gloom of the hallway. Taller and broader than any man. Gaunt, with limbs as long as a spider's. It took a step into a bar of moonlight. I had seen enough. A primal, animalistic scream tore from my throat. I spun around and, stumbling over my own furniture, fled. Anywhere, just away from those burning eyes. My mind was operating on pure instinct. Run, hide, survive. The thought of the locked front door pierced the panicked chaos in my head, and without slowing down, I veered toward the kitchen. The back door. It led to the porch and the garden. It was my only chance. I burst into the kitchen, nearly slipping on the tile. Grabbing the handle of the back door, I yanked it open. The lock clicked, and the door swung wide, letting in the cool night air and the smell of damp earth. Freedom. It was standing on the threshold. Enormous, at least 7 feet tall, the creature was covered in coarse, dark fur. Its body was a monstrous hybrid of man and wolf. Powerful, muscular legs ended in clawed feet, and long arms were balled into fists tipped with yellow, ivory-like claws. but the head was the worst. An elongated, wolf-like snout, dripping with saliva, and eyes, intelligent, human eyes, filled with some kind of torment and fury, burned in the dim light. It let out a low, guttural growl, and I felt its hot, blood-scented breath. I screamed again, this time silently. My legs gave out. Trying to back away, I tripped over the threshold and fell backward. My head hit the kitchen floor with a dull thud. The room swam, the light faded, and the last thing I saw was the monstrous silhouette looming over me against the starry sky. Then darkness consumed everything. Consciousness returned slowly, as if I were surfacing from deep, viscous water. My head was ringing, the back of it throbbing with a dull ache. I was lying on something soft. The rug in my living room. I cautiously opened my eyes. 2 people stood over me. A man and a woman. They were dressed in strange, old-fashioned clothes that didn't look like a costume, but like real, well-worn garments. Leather breeches, linen shirts, heavy woolen cloaks. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of graying dark hair and piercing gray eyes. His weathered face was set in an expression of concern. The woman standing beside him was slender and graceful, with long, raven-black hair braided down her back. Her face was incredibly beautiful, but stern and sorrowful. I sat up abruptly, scrambling away from them. My heart started pounding again. "Who are you?" I rasped, my voice a stranger's. "What do you want? Where are the monsters?" The man held up his hands in a placating gesture. His voice was low and rumbling with a faint accent I'd never heard before. "I apologize, Mr. Penhaligon. We did not mean to frighten you so badly. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I laughed hysterically, pointing at the locked door and remembering my dead phone. My house was invaded by 2 monsters, one of which looked like a nightmare werewolf, and the other, I don't even know what it was. You call that a misunderstanding? "Our guardian, the thing you saw in the garden, creates a dampening field when it manifests," the man explained. "It warps reality in a small radius, jams simple mechanisms, and drains the power from your electronics. He was holding the door to keep you from running out to face the danger he sensed inside. And the one you met at the back door, that was me. Or rather, one of my forms." I stared at him, my lawyer's brain desperately trying to process what I was hearing. Hallucinations. A psychotic break. An elaborate prank. Anything but the truth that was looking at me with its serious gray eyes. "We are what your people call werewolves," the woman continued, seeing my confusion. "We are the Silvermane clan from Umbra, the shadow realm that lies alongside your own." The shadow realm. Umbra. The words echoed in my throbbing head. This was madness. I had gone insane. This was it. The end of Arthur Penhaligon's brilliant career. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm calling the police," I said, trying to stand. But the room swayed again. "We have come to ask for your help," the man, who introduced himself as Gideon, said firmly. "Our son, Lycian, is in trouble. He is accused of murder. A terrible crime. He's been framed. Our world has its own laws, and he faces exile or death. We need a defender, the best. Someone who thinks like you." "You have the wrong address," I snapped. "I'm a corporate lawyer. I don't defend werewolves. Get out of my house." I tried to sound commanding, but my voice betrayed me with a tremor. "We know who you are, Arthur Penhaligon," the woman Alara said, "and we know who your grandfather was, Archibald Penhaligon." At the mention of my grandfather's name, I froze. "What do you know about him?" "He was a friend to our people," Gideon answered. Many years ago, when we faced injustice, he came to our world more than once to help us. He understood our laws better than many of our own. He was a man of honor, and he possessed the same sight as you, the ability to see beyond the veil. My missing grandfather, the Wanderer, helping werewolves in the Shadow Realm. The pieces of an insane puzzle began to fit together into a picture my rational mind wanted to recoil from in horror. "We are not asking for help for free," Alara said, stepping forward. She placed a small but heavy-looking leather pouch on my coffee table. It clinked. She untied it, and a handful of dully gleaming coins spilled onto the polished wood. Gold. Real, ancient gold. "I don't need your money," I said automatically. My thoughts were far away. My grandfather. The only thread leading to the mystery of his disappearance was right in front of me, in the form of these strange, impossible creatures. What happened to him? Do you know where he is? Gideon and Alara exchanged a look. There was sadness in their eyes. "We don't know," Gideon answered quietly. "One day he came to Umbra, as he had many times. But that time he spoke of something different, something that had fallen from the sky. He went in search of it in the wild lands to the east, and he never returned. That was a very long time ago. We fear he perished." Silence hung in the room. I looked at the gold on the table, at these strange ancient faces, and realized I was at a crossroads. I could throw them out, call a doctor, take some pills, and try to forget this night as a terrible dream. Return to my safe, logical world. Or I could take a step into madness, a step in my grandfather's footsteps, into a world of shadows and monsters, to find answers, to understand who he was, and perhaps who I was. Fear still held my heart in an icy grip. But beneath it, something else was kindling. Curiosity. A thirst for a solution. The feeling that my entire life had been nothing but a prelude to this moment. I took a deep breath, the air burning my lungs. "All right," I said, my own voice surprising me with its firmness. "I'll help you. Tell me everything, from the beginning." "How do we get to your world?" I asked, as the three of us stood in my backyard under the cold light of the moon. My house behind me seemed like an island of fragile normalcy in an ocean of encroaching madness. "Not all paths are open," Gideon replied, leading me across the garden to its very edge, where a huge, ancient oak grew. The same oak that I had thought whispered to me as a child. But some places, they are thinner. The border between worlds is almost worn away here. Trees like this, we call them thresholds. Their roots reach into the soil of both worlds. He approached the mighty trunk, covered in moss and deep fissures like wrinkles on an old man's face. Legends say the first thresholds grew where the blood of an ancient god touched the earth. They are gateways. But only one who carries the blood of a border warden, or one guided by them, can open it. Gideon placed his palm against the bark. "Your grandfather was one, and so are you, Arthur. You can feel it, can't you?" I stepped closer, and I did feel it. The air around the tree vibrated, as if from heat. I felt a faint but distinct pulse emanating from the wood itself, as though a huge, slow heart were beating beneath the bark. Alara stood on the other side of the trunk and placed her hand on it as well. "Now you," she said softly, "place your hand between ours." Swallowing hard, I reached out a trembling hand and touched the cool, rough bark. In that instant, the world exploded. It was not sight or sound, but pure sensation. I felt the human world recede, folding up like the page of a book, while something else took its place. The trunk of the oak beneath my palm became soft and pliable, like wax. The space before us rippled, distorted, and the darkness between the branches thickened, transforming into a dark, shimmering passage, like the surface of a pond on a moonless night. "Don't let go and follow me," Gideon commanded, and stepped directly into the tree, vanishing within it. Ilara gave me an encouraging look and followed him. I squeezed my eyes shut and took a step forward, into the unknown. The sensation was like plunging into cold water. For a moment, I lost all orientation, and then my feet touched solid ground. I opened my eyes. We were standing in a forest, but it was no earthly forest. Huge, unfamiliar trees stretched their twisted branches toward a sky where two dim, pale violet moons hung instead of one. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something sweet, almost cloying. Tiny lights flitted around us. I looked closer and realized they weren't fireflies. They were tiny, winged humanoid creatures, leaving trails of golden dust behind them. "Pixies," Ilara explained, noticing my gaze. "Harmless unless you anger them." We started down a barely visible path. "Welcome to Umbra, Arthur," Gideon said, walking ahead. "Our world exists alongside yours, but it lives by different rules. The most important, the most sacred, is to do no harm to humans in their world and not to bring them here without grave cause. The murder of a human on our soil is an unheard of crime. That is why Lycian's case is so serious." As we walked, he explained. Umbra was a world where myths and legends were reality. All those beings that humans considered fairy tales lived here. We passed a foul-smelling swamp, in whose murky waters I noticed slick figures with huge eyes and webbed feet. In the distance, a mournful howl echoed, making the hair on my neck stand on end. After an hour's walk, the forest began to thin and lights appeared ahead. We had reached a city. Nocturn. It was carved directly from the black rock of a huge mountain that loomed over it. Spires and towers jutted into the violet sky at unnatural angles. The streets were lit not by electricity but by glowing crystals and hovering spheres of cold blue fire. And the creatures, the most incredible beings, walked the cobblestone streets. Stocky, bearded dwarves in leather aprons, tall, elegant elves with pointed ears, green-skinned goblins hauling sacks of something, and a multitude of half-human, half-beast hybrids. Men with the heads of bulls, women with feline eyes and tails. I felt like the only normal creature in this parade of monsters. "Not every human can enter here and keep their sanity," Ilara remarked, walking beside me. "Most see only their worst nightmares, but you see the world as it is. Your sight protects you." We entered a district that was starkly different from the others. The architecture became more refined, Gothic. On the balconies, pots held roses as black as night instead of flowers. This was the vampire quarter. A group of pale aristocrats in velvet coats floated past us. Their gazes were cold and appraising. "Are they enemies of yours?" I asked quietly. "Enmity is too strong a word," Gideon replied. "More like an old resentment and rivalry. They consider us savages, and we consider them heartless schemers. But we coexist." "What do they feed on?" I asked, curious. "Long ago, they renounced blood," Ilara said. "A pact was made. Now they drink an elixir made from bloodstones. They are rare crystals said to absorb the life force of the earth itself. The problem is, the main deposits are far in the mountains in dangerous lands. Mining them is risky, so the stone and the elixir are very valuable." At last, we passed through the city center and entered a district that looked completely different. The houses here were massive, built of rough stone and dark wood with sloping roofs. They stood further apart, surrounded by small patches of wild forest. This was the werewolf quarter. The air here smelled of hearth smoke, roasted meat, and damp fur. There was none of the city's hustle. It was quiet, but in that quiet you could feel a hidden power. I saw other werewolves. They sat on the porches of their homes, mending harnesses or just silently watching the violet moons. There was nothing monstrous in their appearance. They looked like strong, sturdy people, but a wild, primal fire burned in their eyes. We approached one of the largest houses. Gideon pushed open the heavy oak door, and we stepped inside. The house looked large from the outside, but thanks to some kind of spatial magic, the interior was immense. A huge stone hearth took up almost an entire wall, with logs crackling inside. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes hung on the walls, and the skins of some great beasts lay on the floor. The furniture was simple but massive and sturdy. In the center of the room stood a long table that could have seated 20 people. This was the home of the Silvermane clan, the house where the accused had grown up, and my new temporary office. I sank onto a heavy chair by the fire, feeling the weight of the unreality of it all pressing down on me. I was a lawyer from Boston, and now I was sitting in a werewolf's house in another world, preparing to defend one of them in court. My old life seemed infinitely distant. The next morning, after a restless sleep filled with images of fangs and violet moons, we went to the city hall. It was the most grandiose building in Nocturn, carved into the very heart of the mountain. A colossal structure of black basalt, adorned with gargoyles and glowing runes. Inside, a hum of hundreds of voices from a myriad of creatures filled the air. We entered the main hall where petitions were heard. At a massive table of polished stone sat the head of the city. It was a Sasquatch, a huge being, 10 feet tall, covered in thick brown fur, with wise and somewhat weary eyes. His name was Mayor Borog. He listened to Gideon, nodding his massive head. A lawyer from the human world? His voice was as low as the rumbling of an earthquake. Unusual, but the laws of Umbra do not forbid it if the accused and his family agree. However, the prosecution will object. He was right. A tall, aristocratic figure in a black and silver coat stepped out of the shadows. A vampire. His skin was as white as alabaster, his black hair slicked back. He introduced himself as Lord Valerius, prosecutor for the council. Mayor Borog, this is a farce. His voice was cold and sharp as a shard of ice. A human will defend a beast accused of murdering another human? It is a mockery of justice. He does not know our laws, our traditions. I protest. Protest denied, Lord Valerius, the Sasquatch replied calmly. The Silvermane clan has the right to a defender of their choice. Mr. Penhaligon, he turned to me, you are granted access to the case and the accused. Lord Valerius gave me a look full of venom and departed. I realized I had made a powerful enemy. I was led to the dungeons of City Hall. In a large, damp cell behind thick iron bars sat Lycian. The chains on his wrists were simple iron, not silver. Apparently, until a verdict was reached, he wasn't considered that dangerous. Or perhaps silver was simply too precious for a common holding cell. He was young, about 20, with the same dark hair and gray eyes as his father. But his gaze held none of Gideon's strength, only fear and despair. They said you're a lawyer, he whispered as I approached the cage. Yes, my name is Arthur. I want to help you. Tell me what happened that night. I don't know, he cried, grabbing his head in desperation. It was a full moon. I transformed as always, but I was in control. I swear, I was in my room, in our house. I remember looking at the moons through the window, feeling the power. And then... Then what? I prompted gently. Blackouts. I think I was falling asleep. Just passing out for a few minutes, then coming to again. I don't remember leaving the house. I would never harm a human. It's the first law. This detail alerted me. Memory lapses? Lycian, did you take anything that day? Eat or drink anything unusual? He frowned, trying to remember. No. Although, some gremlins from the mines came to the city that day. They were trading gems. 2 of them approached me in the market. We talked. They were friendly. Offered me some kind of drink, an herbal brew. Said it was to fortify the spirit. I drank it. That's all. Gremlins. A drink. Memory lapses. The details started to form a suspicious picture. I left Lycian and, taking a copy of the case file from Gideon, went to the crime scene. It was outside the city by a small river whose waters were black as pitch. The area was cordoned off with magical barriers that shimmered dimly in the twilight. They found the body here, Gideon said grimly. The body of a human. How did he even get here? I asked, examining the trampled grass and dark stains on the ground. We don't know. Most likely someone crossed into your world, killed him there, and brought the body here to stage an attack by a beast. Then why was Lycian accused? Because of the evidence, Gideon sighed. The tracks. The paw prints perfectly matched Lycian's in his wolf form. A tuft of fur found on a bush branch, his fur. And most importantly, he paused. They found this. He handed me a small object in an evidence bag. It was a silver medallion on a leather cord, engraved with a wolf's head. A family heirloom of the Silvermane clan. Lycian's medallion. It all looked like a perfect, flawless frame-up. Too flawless. What did the victim look like? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Horrible. The body was torn to pieces, ripped flesh, broken bones. Everything pointed to an attack by a werewolf in a frenzy. There wasn't much left of the man. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't done just to kill. It was done to horrify, to leave no doubt as to the guilt of a beast. Is the body still here? I need to examine it. Gideon shook his head. No. By the laws of Umbra, the remains of those who die violently must be purified by fire as soon as possible, so their spirits do not become restless. He was cremated the day after he was found. Too convenient for the prosecution, I muttered. Lord Valerius personally insisted on a swift ritual, citing respect for the spirit. Now I see he was just covering his tracks. The most crucial piece of evidence, the victim's body, was destroyed. The prosecutor could say whatever he wanted about it, and I couldn't refute it. We returned to the city in complete silence. I had too many questions and no answers. Someone very smart and cunning had framed Lycian. Someone who knew the customs of werewolves, who could get his fur and medallion. Someone who wanted not just to condemn one young man, but to cast a shadow over his entire clan. And I was beginning to guess who might benefit from that. Lord Valerius and his pale kin were a little too eager for justice. Returning to the Silvermane house, I went straight to Lycian's room. It was ascetic and clean. A bed covered with a hide, a wooden table, and a shelf with a few books. My gaze immediately fell on a clay mug sitting on the table. I brought it to my nose. It smelled of herbs, but there was another faint chemical scent. Peeking inside, I saw dried residue at the bottom and a few grains of a strange blue substance, like a powder. Bingo. I carefully wrapped the mug in a clean cloth. Gideon Alara, I called, coming downstairs. We need to find someone who knows about herbs and potions. Who can identify this?" They exchanged a look. "There is one," Gideon began uncertainly. "His name is Silas. He's an herbalist, but he's a hermit. Lives on the edge of the Twilight Forest, away from everyone. Will he help?" "He doesn't like strangers," Alara said, "but he is wise. And if we explain the situation, perhaps he will listen." The journey to the herbalist's home took about an hour. We left the werewolf quarter and followed a path that went deeper into the forest, which grew thicker and darker. The air was cooler here, the silence deeper. Finally, we reached a small clearing. In the middle of it stood a strange cottage, more like a hobbit hole built into the side of a hill. The roof was covered in living moss. A thin wisp of smoke curled from a crooked chimney, and the most bizarre plants I'd ever seen grew around it. Flowers that glowed from within, mushrooms of every color of the rainbow, and climbing vines with berries as black as obsidian. Gideon knocked on the round wooden door. After a moment, it creaked open. Standing on the threshold was a goat man, a satyr. Shorter than me, with a muscular human torso covered in sparse fur, and goat legs with cloven hooves. He had small, curled horns on his head, and a goatee and cunning, intelligent eyes gave him the look of a mischievous but wise old man. This was Silas. He surveyed the three of us with a long gaze, his nostrils flaring. "The Silvermane clan, and..." He squinted, looking at me. "The scent of another world. What brings you to my doorstep?" Gideon briefly explained our story. I silently handed Silas the mug. The herbalist took it, sniffed it, scraped a little of the blue powder with his fingernail and rubbed it between his fingers. Then he touched the finger to his tongue. He grunted. "Root of dream vine, pollen of moon lotus, and a drop of swamp toad venom? A classic recipe. This is a powerful sleeping powder. Not lethal, but capable of knocking out a troll for several hours. For a werewolf on a full moon. It wouldn't put the beast's body to sleep, but the mind. Absolutely. He would move but remember nothing. He'd be like a puppet. The powder doesn't shut down the senses completely. It puts the will to sleep. But the beast's eyes still see. The images are recorded in the depths of the subconscious, but the mind doesn't process them. With a strong revealing potion, they could be brought to the surface. This confirmed my suspicions. Lycian had been drugged and then used like a doll to leave tracks and steal the medallion. He looked at me with new interest. "You're not like the other humans who occasionally find their way here, Arthur Penhaligon. There's no fear in you, only curiosity." I liked him too. He had an ancient natural wisdom, devoid of city arrogance. "Silas, may I ask you about something else? Did you know my grandfather, Archibald?" The satyr's eyes warmed for a moment. "Archibald? Yes, I remember him. A fine man, a restless soul. He often visited me. We would talk of herbs, of worlds, of the stars. He was here shortly before he disappeared. Do you know where he went? What he was looking for?" I leaned forward, holding my breath. "He was obsessed with the legend of the fallen star," Silas said, shaking his head. "He said it fell in the wildlands and that it wasn't just a rock, but a key to something great. I tried to talk him out of it. The wildlands are a forsaken place, but he wouldn't listen. He came to say goodbye, said he was heading east. I never saw him again. A new lead, a new pain. He had been so close. As we were about to leave, Silas stopped me. Wait. He disappeared into his house and returned a moment later with a small vial containing a thick golden liquid that glowed faintly from within. Take this. It's the essence of a sunflower, a rare thing. If you find yourself in a truly hopeless situation at the trial, give this to the werewolf. Only if there is truly no hope left. What does it do? The sunflower tolerates no lies or darkness. It compels the speaker to tell only the truth, the absolute, irrefutable truth. He gave me a sly wink, but use it wisely. The truth can be more dangerous than any blade. I thanked him, tucking the precious vial into my inner pocket. Now I had proof of the poisoning and a witness, but it wasn't enough. The prosecutor could claim that Leishan took the powder himself to plead insanity later. I needed to find the one who gave him the drink. I needed to find the gremlins. "Gideon," I said as we emerged from the forest, "where can we find these traitors from the mines?" Gideon's face darkened. "The gremlin warrens, under the city, in the old mines and tunnels. Not a pleasant place. But if you need to find them, we will go." The gremlin warrens, or as the locals called it, the Undercity, was less in the city than beneath it. The entrance was an inconspicuous fissure in the rock at the base of the mountain, from which wafted dampness and the smell of metal. As we entered, the world of Nocturn was left behind, replaced by a labyrinth of low, crudely hewn tunnels lit by dim oil lamps and veins of glowing minerals. The air was stale and heavy. Gremlins, small, wiry creatures with grayish-green skin, large ears, and shifty little eyes, scurried everywhere. They pushed minecarts filled with ore, haggled in makeshift markets, selling everything from rusty tools to dubious-looking food, and squabbled in their chittering language. They gave us sidelong, suspicious glances. Gideon, using his authority and formidable presence, questioned several gremlins, describing the ones Leishan had seen. After some bickering and the clink of a few coins in Gideon's hand, one of them pointed to a dilapidated shack clinging to the cave wall like a shelf fungus. We approached the door. Gideon was about to knock, but I stopped him. I listened. I could hear scrambling and muttering from inside. I nodded to Gideon, and without warning, he broke down the flimsy door with his shoulder. Inside, by the light of a single lamp, a small gremlin was hastily stuffing his belongings into a sack. Seeing us, he shrieked in terror, dropped the sack, and without a second's thought, dove for a hole in the floor covered by a rotten hatch. A moment later, he vanished into the darkness. "He's heading for the sewers!" I shouted. "After him!" Gideon roared, and the three of us, me, him, and Alara, plunged into the dark passage. We found ourselves in a narrow, slimy culvert. The walls were coated in ooze, and murky, foul-smelling water flowed under our feet. Ahead, in the light of our magical lanterns, the small figure of the gremlin darted. He was nimble and fast, knowing every turn of this subterranean maze. The chase was desperate. We raced through the tunnels, splashing through the water, dodging pipes and stalactites hanging from the ceiling. I was breathing heavily, my lungs burning from the lack of clean air. At one turn, I slipped on a slick stone and, to keep my balance, put my hand out against the earthen wall of the tunnel. My fingers brushed against something hard and sharp, sticking straight out of the dirt. I instinctively gripped it to steady myself. A chunk of earth crumbled away, and in the lantern light, I saw what I was holding. It was an uncut crystal, rough but unmistakably recognizable. Dark red, with a dull inner glow. A bloodstone. A thought struck me like lightning. Bloodstones. Vampires. I quickly looked around. Several more such crystals protruded from the wall where I had broken off the piece of earth. They weren't just on the surface, they were part of the rock itself. And we were directly under the city. I quickly stuffed the stone in my pocket and rushed to catch up with the others, adrenaline propelling me forward. Soon, the tunnels led us into a huge natural cavern. The fugitive was here. He stood, panting, in the middle of the cave. There was no way forward. He was trapped.
"Surrender, gremlin!"
Gideon snarled. "You have nowhere to run." The gremlin gave a vicious snarl and whistled shrilly. In response, a thunderous roar echoed from the darkest part of the cavern, and the ground beneath our feet trembled. Something monstrous emerged from the gloom. A huge gremlin, the size of a grizzly bear, with powerful arms and a tiny head. Its skin was thick and warty, and it clutched a giant stone club in its hands. A guardian.
"Get back, Arthur!"
Ilara shouted. In that same instant, both she and Gideon began to change. This was not like what Leishan had described, not an agonizing, forced transformation under the moons. This was a willful, controlled shift, a shadow change, as I would later learn, a technique available only to the clan's most experienced warriors, and one that demanded immense power. Their bodies arched, bones cracking as they reshaped. In seconds, two huge, mighty beasts stood in their place, one dark gray, the other jet black. Two magnificent, furious werewolves. The guardian charged at them with a roar, swinging its club, but it was slow and clumsy. Gideon, like a shadow, dodged a blow that would have shattered stone and sank his teeth into the giant's leg. Ilara came from the other side, her claws slashing the monster across the back. A fierce, primal battle began. Roars, snarls, and shrieks filled the cavern. I, pressed against the wall, could only watch this struggle with a mixture of terror and awe. The werewolves moved with incredible speed and grace, working as one. In a few minutes, the huge guardian fell to the ground, defeated, and moved no more. Gideon and Ilara, breathing heavily, shifted back to their human forms. Their clothes were torn and their bodies were covered in scrapes, but they had won. The little gremlin, his protector vanquished, huddled against the far wall, trembling with fear. He had no one left to rely on. "Now we talk," Gideon said, his voice deadly calm. Stammering in terror, the gremlin confessed everything. Yes, he and his partner had slipped the powder into Lysian's drink. They were paid very well. "By whom?" I asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," he squeaked. "Honest. He was in a cloak with a deep hood. I never saw his face. He spoke quietly. Said we just had to treat the young werewolf to a drink and make sure he drank it. He gave us a pouch of gold and this powder. That's all." It was enough. I had a witness who could confirm the poisoning itself. Lord Valerius could argue all he wanted that it wasn't proof, but now I had something to counter with. "You're coming with us," I said firmly. "And you will tell all of this at the trial." The gremlin nodded fearfully. He had no choice. We took our trembling witness and headed back up to the city of Nocturn, where the trial awaited us. And in my pocket, I had not just a witness, but a small, red, very important stone. The evening before the trial was tense. The atmosphere in the Silvermane clan's home was as heavy as a thundercloud. Gideon silently cleaned a hunting knife by the fire. Ilara paced from corner to corner, and I pretended to study the case files. But in reality, my mind was racing. The gremlin's testimony alone wasn't enough. I needed a motive. An ironclad motive that would explain why someone would frame Leishan. "I need to take a walk, clear my head," I said, getting up. Gideon gave me a worried look. "You shouldn't wander the city alone, Arthur, especially not now. I'll be fine. I just need to think." I stepped out into the cool Umbran night, but I didn't wander aimlessly. I headed to the werewolf quarter, then the vampire quarter, Then the gremlin warrens. I wasn't just walking. I was counting my steps. I was memorizing turns, the slope of the streets, the placement of the buildings. I was building a three-dimensional map of the city in my head. It was an old habit, developed to memorize complex courthouses and office buildings. Here, in this chaotic city, it was more useful than ever. After finishing with the surface, I did something that would have made Gideon's hair stand on end if he had known. I went back down into the Undercity, but this time, I wasn't looking for gremlins. With a lantern in hand, I descended into the same system of sewer tunnels where we had chased our witness. I returned to the spot where I had found the bloodstone. Then I went further, checking the map in my head, tapping on the walls, searching for outcroppings of the ore. I spent over an hour down there before returning. Filthy, but with my eyes burning with anticipation. It all added up. The morning began with the tolling of the City Hall bell. The main hall was packed. It seemed half of Nocturn had come for the trial. The crowd was a menagerie. Stern dwarves with their arms crossed, elegant elves watching with faint disdain, a cluster of goblins making bets on the outcome, and even a few gargoyles sitting motionlessly on the rafters overhead. The atmosphere was electric. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, curious, hostile, sympathetic. My heart beat steadily. The fear was gone. All that remained was the cold thrill of the fight. We were led to the defense table. Opposite us at the prosecution's table sat Lord Valerius, as straight and cold as a statue. Lycian was brought into the hall in chains and placed in the defendant's cage. His parents, Gideon and Alara, sat behind me. I could see the desperation in their eyes. Mayor Borog struck a massive wooden gavel on the stone table, and the din in the hall subsided. The trial of Lycian of the Silvermane clan is now in session. Lord Valerius took the floor. He moved smoothly, his voice echoing through the hall, hypnotic and persuasive. Honored Mayor, citizens of Nocturn, today we judge not just a young man. We judge a crime that threatens the very foundation of our world. The sacred pact has been broken. A human has been brutally murdered on our land. His mutilated body, torn by claw and fang, was found by the Black River. He paused dramatically, letting his words sink into the consciousness of the listeners. The evidence is irrefutable. The tracks of a beast, identical to the tracks of the accused. A tuft of his fur, and finally, his own clan medallion, found at the scene of the crime. There is no doubt that this werewolf, succumbing to his savage nature, committed this monstrous deed. A murmur of outrage swept through the hall. Valerius raised a hand for silence. I will say more. This incident proves what we vampires have said for a long time. The werewolf quarter is a breeding ground for savagery and uncontrolled power in the heart of our city. It is long past time to tear down these barbaric structures and relocate their savage inhabitants closer to the forest, where they belong, far from civilized society. Gideon snarled, leaping to his feet, but Alara held him back. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Easy. This is what he wants. The defense may speak, Mayor Borog rumbled. I stood up. Honored Mayor, my client pleads not guilty, and we have proof of his innocence. I call my first witness. The trembling gremlin was brought into the hall. Under my questioning, he told them everything. How he was hired, how he slipped the powder into Lycian's drink. Lord Valerius didn't even bother to question him. He just gave a lazy smirk. This proves nothing, Honored Mayor. This powder could have acted as a catalyst, not just a sedative. It could have lulled the conscious human part of the werewolf to sleep, but unleashed the uncontrollable, bloodthirsty beast within. So this testimony only confirms that at the time of the murder, Lysian was not in control of himself. His guilt is no less for it. In the eyes of Gideon and Ilara, I saw the last glimmer of hope fade. They thought it was over. "The defense has more evidence," I said calmly. I unrolled a large sheet of parchment on the table. It was the map of the city I had sketched during the night. Lord Valerius speaks of savagery and barbarism. I, however, wish to speak of more terrestrial matters, of geology. I took the bloodstone from my pocket. A whisper went through the hall. Everyone knew what the mineral looked like. Last night, I conducted some calculations and research. I found several outcroppings of this rock in the old tunnels, and my calculations indicate that the largest, richest vein of bloodstones in all of Nocturn lies directly beneath the werewolf quarter. I turned to Lord Valerius, who for the first time lost his icy composure. A flicker of surprise mixed with fury crossed his face. "This is absurd. The conjectures of a human," he shouted. "It is not conjecture. It is a fact that can be easily verified." One might speculate that Lord Valerius's clan, long suffering from a shortage of bloodstones, conducted a secret geological survey. But they couldn't just start digging. That would have meant war with the werewolves. They needed a legal pretense to seize the land. I request that the mole men, the best miners and geologists in Umbra, immediately descend into the tunnels beneath the werewolf quarter and either confirm or deny my words. Mayor Borog nodded, and several squat creatures with shovel-like hands and tiny, beady eyes slipped silently from the hall. After a while, the creatures returned and confirmed that there were deposits, but it would take more time to determine the quantity. I addressed the court again. "Now it all falls into place, doesn't it? The vampires have an obvious interest in this land. And what better way to acquire it than to paint its current inhabitants as savages and murderers who must be exiled? It was they who hired the gremlins, drugged Lysian, stole his medallion and fur, and planted them at a crime scene they themselves orchestrated." "Liar!" roared Lord Valerius, his aristocratic veneer flaking away like cheap gilt. "You, mortal worm, dare to accuse me? I will kill you for this insolent lie." His eyes turned blood red. Sharp, long fangs emerged from his mouth. He was about to lunge at me right there in the courtroom. But I stood calmly, looking him directly in the eye. I had been waiting for this. "I have one last piece of evidence." My voice rang out loud and clear in the sudden silence. I took the small vial Silas had given me from my inner pocket. In the dim light of the hall, the thick golden liquid inside began to glow with a bright, warm light, illuminating my face. A gasp of astonishment went through the hall. Even the youngest goblin knew what it was. A legend, a myth, something no one living had ever seen. "The essence of a sunflower," someone whispered in the crowd. "The potion of divine revelation." Even Mayor Borog leaned forward, his huge eyes wide with surprise. Lord Valerius froze, a look of genuine terror on his face. He realized he was trapped. I walked over to Lysian's cage. "Drink this," I said quietly. "Don't be afraid." He looked at me doubtfully, then at his parents. Gideon nodded. With trembling hands, Lysian took the vial and drained it. In the next second, the incredible happened. Lysian's body began to glow. A bright golden light enveloped him, causing the simple iron chains that bound him to hiss, melt, and fall to the floor. He slowly rose a few feet into the air, as if weightless, his eyes burning with pure sunlight. He was no longer a frightened young man. He was a vessel for the truth. And he spoke. His voice was not his own. It was deeper, more ancient, and it resonated with the power of 1,000 voices. It filled the hall, piercing the very heart of everyone present. On the night of the full moons, my mind slept, lulled by the darkness in the cup. But the eyes of the beast saw. My body was but clay in another's hands, hands that smelled of crypt dust and cold stone. They led me, sleeping, to the river, leaving my tracks on the damp earth. They tore the medallion from my neck. They ripped a tuft of fur from my hide. The light around him grew brighter. I saw through their eyes. The murder was not an act of rage. It was an act of greed. A human, a vagrant from your world, was sacrificed for the red stones that sleep beneath our homes. His life was the price for the land. The killer did not snarl. He laughed. A quiet, cold laugh. His hands were white, and on his finger glittered a ring with the seal of a bat. His name was Valerius. The truth had been spoken, absolute and irrefutable. It hung in the air like a death sentence. Lord Valerius let out a furious, inhuman shriek. "No!" He threw his table aside. He threw aside not just his table, but also his civilized status. To assume such a monstrous combat form in a hall of justice was tantamount to renouncing all the laws of Nocturn. His back arched, and from beneath his expensive velvet coat, 2 huge leathery wings burst forth with a crack, like those of a giant bat. He was about to soar to the ceiling and escape, but he didn't make it. "For my son," boomed Gideon's voice. He and Alara transformed in midair. In a blinding flash, 2 people became 2 enormous wolf monsters. Before the vampire could get off the ground, they were on him in a single leap. Gideon sank his teeth into one wing, Alara the other. They dragged him to the floor. A short, savage fight ensued. Valerius writhed, hissed, his claws gouging deep furrows in the stone floor. But against the combined might of 2 enraged werewolves, he stood no chance. The City Hall guards, recovering from their shock, swarmed him, binding him in heavy chains, this time of pure silver kept in the Hall of Justice for the most dangerous of criminals. The vampire's skin sizzled and smoked where they touched him. It was over. Lycian slowly descended to the floor, the glow around him fading. He was free. Alara, already back in human form, ran to him and embraced him. Gideon walked over to me. Gratitude was written on his stern face. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You saved him. You saved the honor of our clan. We are in your debt, Arthur Penhaligon." The hall erupted into chaos. Werewolves, dwarves, even some of the goblins, all cheered the victory. Justice had prevailed. And I, a lawyer from Boston, stood in the center of this whirlwind, feeling more alive than I ever had in my life. That evening, the werewolf quarter threw a true feast. Long tables were brought out into the street, meat was roasted on spits, and strong ale flowed from kegs. Music, laughter, and loud conversations filled the air. I was seated in the place of honor next to Gideon and Mayor Borog, who had come down from his mountain to congratulate the victors. I was hailed as a hero. Everyone considered it their duty to come over, clap me on the shoulder, and raise a tankard to me. Lycian, no longer a frightened prisoner but a confident young wolf, stayed by my side, thanking me endlessly. I smiled, accepted the congratulations, but my thoughts were already far away. When the noise subsided a little, I turned to Mayor Borog. His huge figure loomed over me like a cliff. "Mayor?" I began, trying to shout over the music. "I helped this city. Now I want to ask for help for myself. I was told that my grandfather, Archibald Penhaligon, disappeared in these lands many years ago. He went east to the wild lands in search of a fallen star. The Sasquatch's face grew serious. He drained his tankard, which was the size of a bucket, and set it down on the table with a thud. Archibald Penhaligon. I remember him, a man with fire in his eyes. Yes, he was obsessed with that idea. The fallen star is not just a legend. Once every few decades, a celestial body, full of untold energy, falls in the wild lands. Some believe it is a gift from the gods, others a curse. Do you know what happened to him? Mayor Borog shook his massive head. No one knows. He left 20 years ago. No one who has ventured into the wildlands in search of the star has ever returned. That region is dangerous, Arthur. It is home to dark, ancient forces, creatures of chaos that do not obey the laws of Nocturn. We believe your grandfather perished long ago. I am sorry. 20 years. An eternity. But I couldn't just accept it. I had to try. I had to know the truth. I want to go there, I said firmly. I want to follow his path. The mayor looked at me with his wise, ancient gaze. I see the same fire in you that was in him, but it is impossible. Not now. The path to that part of the wildlands only opens when a new star falls. Its light briefly dispels the darkness and shows the way through the magical barriers. And according to the calculations of our stargazers, the next fall is not for another 2 years. 2 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. I was so close. I had found the thread leading to the mystery of my entire life, and now I had to wait. 2 long years. I'm sorry, Arthur, Gideon said quietly, having overheard our conversation. But that is the way of things. You can stay here with us. You will always be an honored guest in our home. I shook my head. I couldn't. My life, my world, was back there, beyond the threshold. My job, my firm, everything that had seemed so important to me just yesterday now looked pale and meaningless. At dawn, Gideon and Alara walked me back to the old oak tree. The air was cool and crisp. The 2 violet moons were already sinking toward the horizon. We will never forget what you did for us, Alara said, her stern eyes warm. Come back in 2 years, Gideon said, and we will go in search of your grandfather together. You are a friend of the Silvermane clan, and we do not abandon our friends. I nodded, unable to speak. We placed our hands on the trunk again. The world of Umbra shimmered, rippled, and I stepped back through. I was in my own backyard. The first rays of the rising sun were filtering through the leaves. Birds were singing. I had been gone for only a night and a day in my world, but in Umbra, it felt like a lifetime had passed. The world was the same as it had been 2 days ago, but I was different. I walked into my empty, quiet house. In the living room, the pouch of ancient gold still lay on the coffee table. I picked it up. It was heavy, real. Proof that it hadn't all been a dream. I went up to my office on the 2nd floor, which overlooked my perfect, orderly suburb. I was no longer just Arthur Penhaligon, successful lawyer. A part of me would forever remain there, in the city of eternal night, alongside werewolves, vampires, and talking satyrs. My life had been divided into a before and an after. I had lived in a world of facts, but now I knew there were worlds woven from magic and myth. I had built my life on logic, but the fate of my bloodline was determined by ancient sites and prophecies. I had sought order, and instead I had found my true purpose in chaos. 2 years. It seemed like an eternity, but I would wait. I would work, live my old life, but it would all be a game, a performance. Because now I knew who I was. I am a Penhaligon. I see what is hidden, and in 2 years I will return to Umbra. I will find my fallen star. I will learn the truth about my grandfather. My real case had just begun.